and welcome to the Better You podcast, sponsored by Lamco Wellness. With us today, we have the people from Flora Quest, which are doing some awesome work in the field of plant-based medicine. I will kick it over to them to introduce themselves. If we want to start with Dr. Margaret Jackson.
Good morning. My name is Margaret Jackson, and I am perhaps a little bit unlike the rest of the folks who are going to be on this call today. I'm an ethnomusicologist, and I'm also a musician. And for your listeners, ethnomusicologists are anthropologists who center music in their sociocultural analyses. But my own journey with plant based medicine began as a cancer patient, and that sparked my personal interest in the endocannabinoid system, which then sparked a professional interest in the ways that we can influence our own endogenous cannabinoid production through music and dance and other types of artistic creation.
That is awesome. We did not talk about that in the prep for this. I feel like I may want to do a follow up just to talk about all of that because that sounds super fascinating.
Great.
Uh, Dr. Hillary Taylor, if you want to go.
Sure, I would love to go. Good morning, everybody, or good afternoon. I am Dr. Hillary Taylor. I have been a psychologist for the past 20 years. I practice mainly as a positive psychologist. I'm very active. I keep people moving in the right direction, and that sort of led me to using cannabis as plant-assisted therapy because I really think that it does help people move even faster into their own journey and self-awareness. I too am a medical patient. I have found that it's been extremely helpful in my own journey. And so I promote, educate, and advocate for plant medicine laws. I work with plant medicine patients, and we all here are very passionate about what we do.
That's awesome. Bill Garland.
Hi, everyone. My name's Bill Garland. I'm a United States Army veteran. My journey with Flora Quest began maybe 6 or 7 years ago now, basically searching for answers to things that were taking place not only in my life, but a lot of my fellow veterans. It's now being called PTS, and, uh, we also have other issues that we deal with. And in searching for different ways to find relief, and not just for me, but for other family members that seem to be impacted by, our behaviors, our change in, expression. Uh, our journey has been very thoughtful, insightful, just walking alongside some very incredible people and learning all of the different modalities that exist to be able to help people to overcome some of the mental health obstacles that we have, depression. It's just been an amazing journey to find. It was great to hear Meg, and I've known Meg for a few years now, and it's the first time I heard that explanation of what she does. And I am now very interested because I can find that music is very helpful, in different ways. But as far as my role within the team, I guess I am a little bit different as well. I'm boots on the ground. I love getting out there with people. My speaking presence doesn't take place until I'm speaking with other people that need help. So hopefully that kind of comes out here. But thanks for the introduction.
Happy to. And the person who actually connected all of us, thank you, Dr. Lonnie Weiss. Or Weiss, I'm
Well,
sorry if I'm saying it incorrectly.
no worries. Thank you so much. Basically, a little bit about myself. I have been in this field for about 30 years. I was trained as a traditional psychologist in the Western way and started my career actually doing work in facilities that were called dual diagnosis, dealing with addictions. So I started literally on the other end of the spectrum. We were taught everything that was wrong with cannabis. We were taught that cannabis is a drug of abuse. We were taught psychedelics are drugs of abuse, etc. Yet the things that we treated in these facilities were not psychedelics and cannabis. Keep that in mind. People that were using cannabis and psychedelics were typically not the ones addicted to crack cocaine, to alcohol, things like that. So that did get my attention. Fast forward, traditional psychotherapy practice, and then about 10 years ago, give or take, the state of Florida opens a medical cannabis program within the state. Having clients that needed to know how to do something medical with cannabis, but were not getting the advice from the clinicians, which gave them access to the card. So I took the time to start learning. I took a deep dive. I started to learn everything I could find. The pandemic hit. I really had a lot of free time, and I dove in deeper, and it was amazing. At that point, I started to really explore what is cannabis, how to make different concoctions with it. So taking it from the flower form and turning it into an oil, a tincture, turning it into other types of ways, modes of administration. And at one point, Bill and I had met, and we started to talk about doing something with veterans. So I began to take pounds of hemp and turn it into CBD tincture, because one of the things that's prohibitive is the cost. At that time, it was $80 to $120 a bottle. And literally, people on a fixed income, how many veterans can afford to go out and buy this in addition to whatever else they're taking? So that led me to learn as much as I can about not only how the medicine works, but really the science behind it. I took a really great course with my mentor, Dr. Dustin Sulak. Learned a lot about the clinical way to use medical cannabis. And here I am today. I have expanded this because it's not just cannabis. We were told different things in my training and historically about psychedelics not being a useful substance. Really not true. When you start to understand the history of this world, it tells you a different story. And one of the things that I was recalling as I was thinking about our meeting today, all of these great names in history, people like Plato, people like Aristotle, people like Marcus Aurelius, okay, famous, Roman emperor and Stoic philosopher. There was a phenomenon back in Greece called the Eleusinian Mysteries. Anybody ever heard of that? It's interesting because the research shows that they drank something and they had these incredible experiences. Turns out it was an LSD type of concept. It's basically ergot in some form of drink, and they hallucinated, but they had a spiritual awakening. So when you start to look at the history of this, you start to see archaeologists finding in Hebrew temples thousands of years ago, they had cannabis residue on altars. So psychedelics were used in a different way. And that's what really led us to develop this company.
I mean, that's awesome. I mean, so me personally, my experience with plant-based medicine is strictly not in the medicinal sense. It's very high school and college related. You have friends who I mean, well, they want to go get high, and that's the long and short of it. But I do remember, you were talking about the addiction work, and I remember seeing all the commercials about all of this, the problems with cannabis and marijuana and how it's awful and everything. And I remember thinking like, well, my one friend who just got a full ride scholarship smokes weed regularly. I don't know that it's as bad as people are making it out to be, but also I don't know anything. And so I agree with you there. To me, there's definitely been kind of this demonization of it, that anybody who knows anybody who has done it is kind of like, that doesn't make sense. It doesn't really flow with the reality that I'm experiencing around it. Um, but I am also interested in kind of the psychedelic aspect of it, because I do have family members who have struggled their entire lives with anxiety, depression, various issues, and then they started taking psychedelics, and they're like, "Oh yeah, it's been great for me. It's been amazing." But we also had a conversation earlier. Sorry, I'm just rambling a little bit about my own experiences with things. But we also had a conversation last week about the importance of doing the work, and I have a feeling we're going to get into that a lot. Um, but yeah, I in talking to one of my family members, she was talking about her experience on mushrooms, and she was saying that for her it was basically like a giant reset button on her brain, where it let her remap the pathways that she kept following automatically that would get her into trouble. But she was also saying that it didn't come automatically. She still found herself starting to drift into those pathways. It's just she was able, after taking the mushrooms, to notice that and try and start to shift it. Um, I don't know that that's a question. It's just kind of my own background on things and my own experience with things. My question is, and it's a two-part question because I think they go hand in hand. What is plant-based medicine exactly, and what is the endocannabinoid system that some of you have talked about already?
Dr. Lonnie, I know that you're going to discuss this. I want to start it out with speaking about what cannabis and psychedelic medicine is not, and kind of related to what you just said. It is not a cure. It is not a quick fix. And that is why we do what we do. And Dr. Lonnie will tell you more about cannabis and how it helps us. But if you're taking SSRIs,
What
if you
is an SSRI, by the way?
a certain type of antidepressant,
Okay.
the majority of antidepressants are SSRIs today. Certain psychedelics like mushrooms won't work because they work on the same neurotransmitters. So if you think about what something like an antidepressant does, if you can do that work with plant medicine, and then you can actually do the work with a guide or a trained guide such as Dr. Lonnie or I, a clinician, to do the work to combine the things. Again, it's not a quick fix. It's not a fix. It's something that needs to be worked on, just like any habit that you want to establish. You need to continue doing it. Our brains are muscles and they need to be worked out. And so, yes, you need to go back to your coping skills and the things that you learned and reestablish those new pathways so that they really stick. So I just wanted to say it's not a cure. It's not an end all be all. Everybody who does use plant medicine uses it for various reasons. But it is a lifestyle, I believe. It is something that can be used therapeutically and can also be used recreationally. So that was my.
Oh no, thank you. Bill, go ahead.
I on something that you were talking about, and it kind of ties back into what Aaron was talking about with his family members. Um, some of us don't have those neural pathways existing. We don't have those habits. We don't have the ability to, it's almost impossible to change something if you don't have the right tools. So what I feel like Hillary was saying, this is one of the tools. It can be cannabis, can be psychedelics, can be music, breathing exercises. These are all tools. But if you don't have those neural pathways existing, it takes work. You have to sit down like with a clinician. I've worked with some excellent mentors, life coaches, where, like they're saying, not necessarily the psychedelic end, but maybe we have a little bit of cannabis and we sit down and we get down to the heart of something, and then they can begin to teach, because not all of us have been given the skill sets. Not all of us have had the healthy family relationships that develop the ability to say, okay, yeah, I'm going off the rails here. I'm going to need some help. But that's kind of where not kind of, but that's where Flora Quest comes in. We have the ability and we have the team that can bring that together and teach the skills that a lot of us are lacking, because I really see in society today some of the basic skills that I figure people take for granted they really shouldn't, you know.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Uh, Meg, I believe was
I don't mean to throw you a curveball. Margaret, I guess, is what my mother used to call me when I would get in trouble. I typically go by Meg. I wanted to respond also to something that you said, Aaron, when you were describing your experience with your family member, but also your own feelings of, well, I don't know a lot about this, and I think that your experience is a very common one, and that is something that Hillary is addressing, Bill is addressing, and I know that Lonnie will address as well. I think that that is a very common experience for a lot of people, especially in the United States, because we have a long history and a rather complicated history with plant-based medicines in this country. And I will kick the ball to Lonnie in a second, and he can kind of give us a greater overview of the history of plant-based medicines. But I think for me, I think about the sociocultural history of the way that we encounter cannabis and other plant-based substances, and how we think about using them in palliative care. And it has been a history typically focused, especially within the research community, on looking for the negatives of cannabis, specifically cannabis consumption. And there was a large amount of research devoted in the late 1960s and early 1970s to cannabis in this country, but it was focused primarily on what are the negative effects of ingesting these plant substances, which means that you were already starting from a particular research stance rather than looking for the beneficial components and the beneficial effects of consuming plant-based substances in a medicinal setting or in a medical setting. And so, we now in 2025 are in kind of a fascinating place because I think the majority of us on this call, on this podcast, grew up with a lot of messages. I lived through the Nancy Reagan "Just Say No" era, and the amount of fear that was connected to the consumption of plant-based substances was pretty significant. And I think that that continues within our medical communities. I think it continues now within communities of people who could really benefit from using plant-based therapies, but they simply don't know where to begin or how to do these things safely. And so part of what we do is demystify these processes for people, and hopefully not only educate potential patients, but also practitioners who are coming into the space who are also part of the same sociocultural experiences that we've had, who may feel like they simply don't have the kind of guidance or direction that they need to have. A very quick aside, we'll get into the endocannabinoid system in just a moment, but it wasn't discovered until 1995, which is just 20 years ago. And if you know anything about medical research and then how medical research gets translated into an academic context for people who are doing their training to become physicians, to become nurse practitioners, to become nurses, the presence even of the endocannabinoid system in medical textbooks is something that's just emerging. So when we think about that, it's understandable why those holes in people's backgrounds exist. So that's on the professional and provider level. So at the lay level for folks like us, it's completely understandable that we just haven't had access to detailed and substantive scientific data.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely I don't know very much about it. I know it gets you high, and the experience that people have when they're high, they're a lot more agreeable most of the time, which is, I think, good for everybody a little bit. But I do remember speaking. Since we're on a podcast, I was watching Neil deGrasse Tyson's. I think it's called Star Talk podcast, and he had somebody on there talking about. Um, I think it was cannabis, but they said something along the lines of that our body like naturally has receptors to take in cannabis that it doesn't have for pretty
Yes,
much all the rest of the drugs. That's what we're talking about here, right?
clearly. Yes,
That's
clearly.
awesome.
You asked a very specific question about something called an endocannabinoid system, and I will explain that. Everyone has had such great points today, and I just want to respond to a few of them. Aaron, your experience, as Dr. Meg pointed out, is a very common one where your aunt had an experience on a psychedelic and something happened. We, as humans, have something that gives us a way of looking at the world, okay? And that is just typical brain centers that fire together. In neurobiology, what fires together wires together, okay? And that's called a default mode network. That creates our typical way of perceiving things. You could call it an ego loosely, you could call it a personality or just a perceptual bias. So if I'm a negative person, if I've been traumatized, I'm going to see things in that way. What happens here is that a psychedelic plant comes and it suspends that for a while and creates something called openness. And what we get is this reduced resistance to hearing something different than our rigid way of perceiving something. And that's the beauty of a psychedelic. There is something that, I don't want, to sound like I'm putting down a famous author, but Michael Pollan in his book in 2018, How to Change Your Mind, he gave people this idea that a psychedelic, LSD, you use it once and you're done. That is not true. There's a great deal of work that goes into psychedelic assisted therapy to make it work. What people get are the transient benefits of a psychedelic. So they take it and then they feel better for a period of time. So mushrooms, for example, literally within a day or two of taking them, it's going to do something different because it's creating the opportunity for different brain connections. It literally gives you an opportunity, not a guarantee. So that system that you've been working with is habitual, okay? The thoughts, systems that come together. In order to change it, you have a period of time where that substance is in your system. Let's say, mushrooms, that's about a 4 to 6 hour window.
Mm-hmm.
And you see things in a different way. When it wears off, if you don't start practicing that new way of thinking, the old stuff comes back in and you go back to that step one. So, that is an important piece of what your aunt experienced, is an opportunity for growth. Now, you asked a couple of other questions, and I do want to kind of travel back to that. What is plant-based medicine? Simple answer, everything before pharmaceutical companies, okay? Because literally the history of humans on this planet is associated with plants as medicine. When you start to understand that we literally went out of caves and found stuff, tried it. If it made us sick, we didn't try it again. If it did something, we made note of it. So, communities, and you start to look at indigenous populations, in South America, the term curandero, okay, so these are spiritual healers that learn how to connect with nature and prayer, and they bring about change in a disease state in a human. This has gone on for tens of thousands of years. So for millennia, we have had a connection with nature and how that affects us. Today, we have companies that separate the human from the natural environment. So we're used to going to a store and buying a bottle of something. So for example, elderberry, I don't grow the plant, but I get it in a tablet form. But guess what? That tablet form works quite well to boost my immune system and prevent me from getting all of the colds that I would normally get in winter. So that would be sort of a modern day example of plant-based medicine. I learned this when I was a child. My mom, she grew up on a farm. And I remember I must have been 7 or 8 years old walking with her. And she said, Lonnie, can you pick up that plant? So I dug up this little plant, took it home. She rinsed it off and she made a tea out of it and it settled her stomach. That's when I first realized plants are medicine. Here I am today. I've had my experience with a range of things. I've gone out and experimented with a lot of things, and I found an incredible amount of benefit from different plants. So working in what we called sick buildings, psychiatric hospitals and locked units, I
Mm-hmm.
learned a lot from the nurses there how to use things like herbal remedies to not get sick. So there are many different things that we can do, and we need to understand them in a different way. So plant-based medicine is going back to our roots. Botanical remedies, for example, looking
Mm-hmm.
at things that you can buy in a store without needing a prescription for it. Doesn't mean that they're harmless. Okay, simply going and buying ginseng or ginkgo biloba, you don't understand. There are downline medical problems that you can cause. So let's say you get injured, but you now have ginkgo in your system. Ginkgo is a blood thinner. So if you wind up getting injured and doctors can't stop your bleeding, that's a problem. So we need to take seriously the medicinal properties of
Yeah.
plants. Does
And
that make
Doc,
sense?
I just want to add into there. My history is also in aromatherapy, and aromatherapy has become so accepted and westernized. We know the benefits of certain plants. We know the benefits of lavender. That's like a normal thing now to have lavender in our soaps and our diffusers because we know it's a relaxant. So there are certain plants that have been vilified, and there's certain plants that people are starting to learn about and become more mainstream and aware of. So yes, herbology is a thing, and just getting more people and more of the Western medicine connected with the Eastern medicine is a big thing that we do as well.
Awesome. Meg, oh, you're on mute.
There we go. Just building off of what Hillary and Lonnie were saying, to think about the plant substances that Lonnie was describing. Um, and to go back to your question about what the endocannabinoid system actually is, all of those plant substances that he's referencing, or even the tea that his mom may have made or made when he was a child, we're really looking at this relatively complex system that is spread throughout the body. It's a cell signaling system, and it helps us regulate specific things within the body. So when we think about mood and our sleep and our appetite and our sensations of pain, all of that is embedded within the endocannabinoid system. Some people will say ECS. And an endocannabinoid is this naturally produced molecule, and you have receptors all over the body. So these little sites kind of throughout the body that can receive the production of these molecules as they're generated, and you can have them internally. And so what I was just referencing briefly earlier, that certain kinds of actions can produce endocannabinoids. Those are internal cannabinoids. In addition to that, when you're focused on plant-based medicine, you're focused on exogenous cannabinoids. So cannabinoids that exist outside of the body that can plug into those receptors. So hopefully that gives us a little understanding of kind of what that system is.
To build upon that, great start to that, what we're really looking at is an internal system that has two basic receptors that have been identified. One called CB1, the other CB2. So in CB1, we're dealing with an internally produced cannabinoid. So cannabinoids are things, canna, so things that you can find in the cannabis plant, but they're internally produced. So endo, internal, and cannabinoid being that molecule's shape. If you understand we have a lock in our body that has been inherited, and literally looking at about 600 million years. Okay, so ontogenetically, there is a mollusk in the ocean 600 million years old that has a CB1 receptor. So if it's been around for that length of time, guys, it's got to be important in nature's eyes. So here we are, we have coexisted with this plant called cannabis for thousands of years, tens of thousands of years in human history. So the co-evolution is interesting because here the CB1 receptor produces our own internal version of THC, and it has a whole range of products. that it affects things like pain modulation, mood, things like that. When you start to look at, on the other end, CBD is another component within the cannabis plant. And we're not going to get into a fine discussion of it yet, just sort of a broad top level. So CB2 receptor is what the CBD molecule triggers, and inside the body is an analog of CBD. So in about 1999, there were some researchers that talked about something that they hypothesized called a clinical endocannabinoid deficiency syndrome. And what they were saying is that at some point, if the body produces this, disease is the expression of an imbalance in the system. And what's fascinating is here in 25 ensuing years or so, they've literally found this. Researchers in Australia, for example, found lower levels of endocannabinoids in children with autism. So the treatment is interesting. In the 10 years that I've been doing this work in this state with things like CBD, how many kids do you think I've worked with who came because this is the system? They would send them to Dr. Lonnie, just give them a diagnosis of ADHD so we can prescribe them meds and settle them down and everything will be fine. Or worse yet, kids on the autism spectrum, because the meds don't work. They may have a brief spike, but then problems come. And then CBD comes along. And, I talk with parents and it's like, guys, you're about to send this child to a restricted facility where they're locked. Do you really want to do that, or do you want to explore this a little bit? So I got them to explore, learn about something like the endocannabinoid system, what CBD is, what it can do. And oh my God, within a week of starting it, the kid's a different kid. Why? Because it was the missing block. So coming back to the point of the endocannabinoid system, CBD, that CB2 molecule, literally related to 67 different pathways of communication in the human body from head to toe. Okay, literally things from your scalp and male pattern baldness all the way down to things like gout in your foot. Okay, when we start to understand appetite, leptin and ghrelin production, that's modulated by CBD. That's appetite increase and cessation or satiety. These are all things that we don't even realize that our body naturally uses to control how we feel, how we think, how we act. So
So
learning to, I'm sorry.
go ahead. I just have a few questions that I want to just ask really quickly, because based off of the last three speakers, I have some questions.
Please go right ahead. Yes.
So first things first, the based off of what you said, it sounds like it's possible to just be high without getting high.
Could I
Yeah.
speak to that really
Yeah.
quickly?
I'm sure we all can, but you're going to say it much more eloquently. Go ahead.
Yes. Okay. So I don't know about the folks on this call, but have you ever had runner's high?
Yes,
Or
yes, I have.
gotten a high when you've exercised or done something that's physically strenuous, and you feel this rush that goes through the body after this? That is the expression of your endocannabinoid system. And so what you have is this signaling response that's going on, because as we talked about before, these are implicated in reward, appetite, mood, memory, also neuroprotection, which is why what Lonnie was talking about in terms of deficiency is so significant among the reasons. But there are researchers who have looked early on in a lot of endocannabinoid research. People were looking at exercise-based endocannabinoid production. So they would specifically put people on treadmills, measure, the blood plasma levels at the end of those tests, and then determine sort of the production of endogenous cannabinoids. You get the same thing in terms of mood regulation, sometimes hunger production, as Lonnie was referencing as well. When people sing, actually, there are several studies that have been replicated that show singing has spiked endogenous cannabinoid production by like 40 to 45%. You get different reactions sometimes in mood regulation with dance. people will have endocannabinoid spikes from reading. There are a lot of things that can produce or encourage the production of these endocannabinoids within the body. When Dr. Lonnie was also referencing plant-based medicine historically, when we think of traditional cultures, you don't only have typically the use of a plant, plant-based medicine where it's simply dispensed, but it's often embedded within specific ritual practices. And so you will have people who are chanting, people who are doing specific types of breath work, people who are doing specific type of motions whenever they are engaging in plant medicine consumption. All of those things are not only tapping into the endogenous cannabinoid system, but meeting the exogenous cannabinoid, in those moments. So I don't know if that got at the nature of your question, but yes, we can get high without ingesting anything.
I also want to point out something that I find very helpful. Um, Instead of using can you get high without getting high? Yes, but the term is medicated. So, can you get medicated? What's the difference between getting medicated and getting high? And interestingly enough, the plant, and a lot of what we do is educate about the plant. The plant has two different components. One, which is the psychoactive component, which does get you high, and then there's the CBD, not the THC component. So the CBD, which also is a cannabinoid that is unlocking systems in our body to create balance or homeostasis. And that doesn't get you high. That doesn't have the psychoactive effects. So when Dr. Lonnie is talking about children, we're not advocating for children to get high. So
That
yes,
was my
we
next question, actually.
right. So the delineation between getting medicated from this plant medicine versus using it recreationally and getting high off of it. And that's where, and this is, we'll get to this, I'm sure, in a minute. Um, but percentages of THC, when people go shopping for medication, they say, I want the highest percentage because they're using it more recreationally to get high. We know as clinicians, as professionals, as people in this space, that it's not necessarily the percentage that's going to get you medicated and help you. So we're more on the helping side of it, the medical side of it, not the just using it to get high.
Appreciate Bill.
I kind of wanted to tie a few things that our doctors had said together. So Dr. Lonnie was talking about the autism spectrum,
Mm-hmm.
okay, and how plant-based medicine can be used to help to regulate or to help to bring things together, and then Dr. Hillary was talking about calling it medicating, or rather than getting high or using. I've My journey has brought me to understand, if you've noticed, there are certain types of behaviors that are consistent in autism. They call it stimming. Okay, a lot of times you're going to have vocal stim, you're going to have touch sensory stim, dance stim, all of the things that are mentioned. I, when I first started looking into in the PTS, I was literally brought down a line to where I had to be tested because it was becoming very apparent that I am on the spectrum, very high on the spectrum. And knowing that a child, an adult that is vocalizing or not necessarily seeing, what they're doing is they're self-regulating. And what Flora Quest is talking about doing, and what we're working together to do, is to help people so that they can self-regulate. It can be through through stim, through the voice. I myself, when I really need comfort, I'll sit and I'll hum a song. I can't sing beautifully like Dr. Meg, but I'll hum something, and I can feel that the change in my core. Okay.
Mhm.
So I just kind of thought I could tie that together a little bit in a layman's term, but we literally already are, especially children on the spectrum, they are working to regulate themselves, and we as individuals do the same thing. Again, the plant-based medicine is just an adjunct.
Dr. Lonnie?
No, I'm liking the conversation. I've heard a few things I did want to build upon. Listening to what Dr. Meg was talking about earlier, the endocannabinoid system is only one piece. We do have a pharmacy inside of us. And that's what people don't understand, is that the human body can produce everything it needs to survive. Biochemically, it's amazing. So can we get high or medicated? Well, what are the chemicals needed? So, for example, when you have a person who's a yogi sitting on a mountaintop in the Himalayas and he's in snow, okay, but he's not cold, he's just meditating. Do you understand? He's controlling his body. He's
Mm-hmm.
also having experiences because likely he's fasted. And because he's fasted and he's meditating, he's also creating through his pituitary gland DMT. Do you know what DMT is? Dimethyltryptamine, one of the strongest psychedelics known to mankind. We produce that in our brain, in the pituitary gland. So we are capable of achieving these states through certain types of behaviors. And I love what Meg was talking about, because we're literally talking about the ability of the human body to be stimulated to produce some good tone. It's called endocannabinoid system tone. So when we sleep well, eat well, exercise, sing, play is literally the term that we use for it. When we play and have fun, that system is humming. It's working at its peak. But how many people in this world play, in this Western world? How many people are plagued by stress? How many do not have healthy habits to moderate this stress? So this comes back to what Dr. Hillary's talking about, because we're not just simply saying, go get high. We're teaching people how to live in balance. We're teaching you how to deal with whatever is dragging you out of balance. And this is the problem in the Western approach to psychotherapy, is that we're trying to get you to see it clearly while you're entrenched in a certain way of looking at it. And I brought up a term a little while ago of what cannabis and psychedelics do, and they create openness. That's the beauty of what we offer, is something that creates an open mindset in a therapeutic setting so people can hear what we're talking about. These imbalances in terms of internal nature, they come from the thoughts. They come from our behaviors. And literally that awareness gives us the ability to internally regulate. Another point I wanted to talk about, just building on what Dr. Hillary was saying earlier, the number attached to cannabis is irrelevant. The higher the number is a marketing strategy. That's literally it. If you want to get high, go have fun with it. But eventually that super high number is not going to work. So you're going to need more and more and more. So there's a tolerance associated with it. So you build a resistance to the effectiveness of it. That's the beautiful thing about cannabis. If you use too much, it's not going to kill you. Okay, cannabis literally shuts down the receptors. It's called down regulation. Where if you have, I'm just going to make up the number, 100 open receptors, but you're using too much of it, your body doesn't need it, it'll close down what's not needed. So you're not going to overdose. There are people who abuse cannabis, and the concept is smoking yourself straight, where they're just smoking so much that they're not even high anymore. Why? Because your body is saying you use too much and you don't need it. We don't have that same in alcohol, opioids, things like that. The joke here, the reason, why it's not a joke, but the reason why people die from opioids and alcohol, in the mid or the old brain sections of our brain, there are things that receptors that control heart and lung functioning and brain functioning. Okay, but there are no cannabis receptors there. So the beauty here is that we are preserved in terms of living to fight another day when we avoid the toxins to our system. I'm not saying that things like opioids don't have a place. They're great medicines for pain reduction, but they were never meant for long-term use. They were only meant for short-term, a week or two. And that's the problem, is that we have overused certain things in our culture. So coming back to a state of balance, this awareness that we try to create through education in our patients is super important. The self-reliance in terms of taking care of ourselves is what we cultivate in our patients. starts with what we're doing now, educating. Every patient that comes through my practice gets a smaller understanding of what we're talking about, but also this is where you need to work too. It's not just taking a pill. This is what we've been coerced into in our society. Passively being a participant. You go to an expert, they give you a prescription, you go to a pharmacy, they fill it, and then you take it, and that's it. You don't have to do anything but take your prescription. No, it doesn't work that way. You need to work.
Dr. Meg? You're on mute.
There we go. I wanted to respond to two things, and they're a little bit divergent, but it's building off of things that Dr. Hillary and Dr. Alani both brought up. If you talk to any physician in this country, one of the things when they evaluate what type of medicine they're going to prescribe to a patient, they evaluate and think about a minimally effective dose. That's something, that is just common parlance. If you talk to anyone, they're going to figure out how to give you just enough of something, because with any substance that we ingest, it can either become a medicine or it can become a poison, right? Mm-hmm. And so, that is something that people spend a lot of time thinking about, and they attach great meaning to. So I think one of the things that both Dr. Hillary was addressing when she was clarifying this concept of medicating, and that Dr. Alani was talking about in, really understanding that we are not necessarily talking about the components of the plant that are just so available to us recreationally. Mm-hmm. But we're really talking about something that's a much more nuanced use of plant-based medicines that does require guidance. It's not something where I think that the average person can simply just go in and read a little bit and then say, okay, I think I can do this on my own. It's something that does require expertise, and it does require work. So I did want to respond to both of those things. An additional thing that I wanted to bring up, and this is really bringing Bill into this part of the conversation, is the impact that our communities have on our bodies, and that sense of homeostasis that Dr. Alani was referencing. One of the powerful things that has been part of Bill's work is how you build communities. And one thing that also encourages that level of balance within the body is physical co-presence. We are social human beings, and we crave connection with other human beings, which I think for all of us became readily apparent during the pandemic, when people were, sort of siloed in their spaces and were really denied that experience of contact. And then coming out of that, seeing sort of the dysregulation that we've seen with many people that still exists. These are not just social experiences, they're neurochemical experiences, and they're chemical experiences within the body. And so another component of this, when we're really talking about full health, is the communal aspect of this. And I think that the veterans groups with which Bill has been engaged, and his own experiences in those groups, are pretty powerful testaments to that.